24th of February 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. When looking at a how did we get here situation, it's often difficult to see when and how that started, and often it's much easier to do it from the point of view of a greater distance in time. I'm doing this on the 25th of February, the day after the invasion, and maybe in the future we will know more, but please accept this as a breakdown of the timeline. Since the Second World War, it has been accepted that borders cannot be changed in Europe. People can move, but the border stays where it is. There were cases when it might have made some sense. For example, there are various examples in the former Yugoslavia about for example, dividing Kosovo between Serbia and Albania, with the Albanian parts going to the latter country, or maybe those places that had a Serb majority in Croatia going to Serbia. Anyway, there's just some examples. The principle, however, was completely altered with the invasion of Crimea in February 2014 in the aftermath of the revolution in Ukraine. The Crimea, of course, had never actually shown strong tendencies to become part of Russia. Despite this, there was an overwhelming referendum victory, although admittedly, people in Sevastopol were so keen on joining Russia that, according to Russian television, there was one area where there was 123% voting for it. The excuse being used by Putin is that he wants a demilitarized Ukraine. That is to say, he doesn't want it to be part of NATO, and he wants to, what he calls, denazify the country. Yes, well, the president's Jewish, as was his first prime minister. Denazify? Doesn't seem that way. What the real reason for this happening now is, in my opinion, it's due to the unrest in Kazakhstan early in 2022, and of course the massive protests in Belarus the previous year. This makes him realize how precarious his own position is, and his number one fear is the Russian people rising up against him. As for Ukraine or Georgia, for that matter, joining NATO, it's highly unlikely. New NATO members cannot bring territorial disputes into the organization with them. The only way that these countries could join NATO would be to agree to the Russian occupation of Crimea, South Ossetia or Abkhazia as a permanent state, and for these countries to say that they had no further demands. Effectively, this would be a territorial concession to Russia. Now let's have a look at the timeline. On the 10th of November 2021, the United States said that it had noticed unusual Russian troop movements near the Ukrainian border. 18 days later, on the 28th of November 2021, Ukraine said Russia had gathered nearly 92,000 troops for an offensive at the end of January or early February. The total size of the Russian armed forces is around 900,000 men in total. However, it does spend less per capita on weapons than does, for example, the United States. Therefore, the average soldier in Russia is far less well equipped. The military tradition has always been to go for quantity over quality, and this is a tradition going back hundreds of years in both Tsarist and communist times. Russia, of course, denied that this build-up was taking place and accused Kiev of doing its own build-up, but failed to say what the build-up was for. At the same time, Russia demanded legal guarantees that Ukraine would never join NATO. Well, this is a bit pointless if you think about it, because if one imperialist state can make such demands on countries it's likely to prey on, then you'd have to question what the whole point of having defensive alliances was. On the 7th of December 2021, US President Joe Biden threatened that he would retaliate with, and I quote, strong economic and other measures in the case of an invasion of Ukraine. On the 17th of December 2021, the Putin regime made suggestions to limit US and NATO influence on former Soviet states, but made no proposals as to how to limit Russian influence. On the 17th of January 2022, Russian troops began arriving in Belarus, allegedly for exercises. Belarus is often called the last dictatorship in Europe, probably by people who have never heard of Russia. The regime in Minsk also faced strong protests the previous year, so Putin would have every reason to shore up his fellow dictator. The aim of these exercises was at, and I quote, thwarting external aggression, or at least that's what they claimed. On the 19th of January 2022, the United States said it would donate an extra $200 million in military assistance to Ukraine. Now, $200 million sounds like a lot of money when it's in your back pocket, but as far as military kit goes, then it doesn't buy a great deal. With that money, one could buy 2 fighter aircraft if one dispensed with some of the options. Alternatively, one could buy missile defenses such as anti-aircraft and anti-armor weapons, which are uniquely defense weapons and might deter an attacker planning on using planes, missiles and tanks in an assault. On the 24th of January 2022, NATO put troops on standby and sent military equipment to its eastern flank. On the 25th of January 2022, the Russian army began military exercises involving around 6,000 troops and at least 60 fighter aircraft on the Ukrainian border in southern Russia and in Russian-occupied Crimea. On the 26th of January 2022, the United States said that Russian demands were unrealistic and would not say that Ukraine can never join NATO. But it didn't say that it would join NATO either. On the 27th of January 2022, the communist dictatorship in China stated that Russia's security concerns should be taken seriously. The same day, the United States predicted a Russian invasion within the following 3 weeks. On the 28th of January 2022, Putin said that the West had ignored Russia's fundamental concerns on NATO's expansion and had strike weapon systems near the Russian border. However, he failed to name what those weapons were. There are, of course, NATO bases in Poland, for example. The most easterly air base is just south of Wask, which is about 1,200 kilometers from Moscow. On the 2nd of February 2022, the United States sent 3,000 troops to Eastern Europe. On the 10th of February 2022, Russia and Belarus began a 10-day military exercise. On the 15th of February 2022, whilst the Russians were claiming that the exercises were over, there was a bit of a foul-up on the Russian language Facebook page of the Ministry of Defense, which showed video of troops going into occupied Crimea over the bridge. I noticed that the Deutsche Welle repeated that this showed troops leaving, so either the Russian Ministry of Defense changed the Facebook post, Deutsche Welle made a mistake, or I don't know the difference in Russian between the words to enter and to leave. Whatever it may be, within a short time, however, NATO claimed that it saw no sign of a withdrawal. On the 17th of February 2022, there was increased artillery fire coming from the 2 Russian-backed enclaves in eastern Ukraine. A day later, the leaders of the Donetsk and Lugansk separatist regions said that they were pulling their inhabitants out. It was an evacuation of some people. Now, to be quite honest, this all smacks of a false flag operation, and it suggests that Moscow told Donetsk and Lugansk to do this. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken accused Moscow of false provocations to justify further aggression against Ukraine. False provocations, they are his words. I would use the word false flag. And let's of course remember that Hitler used the same type of false flag operations in his attacks on Czechoslovakia and Poland. Indeed, there are a great deal of similarities between all three cases. On the 19th of February 2022, 2 Ukrainian soldiers were killed on the front line with Russian-backed separatists. Russia made a show of test-firing nuclear-capable missiles, and the United States warned once more that Russia was about to invade. At this time, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky proposed a meeting with Putin, which of course, like Hitler in 1939, Putin had no intention of agreeing to. On the 21st of February 2022, France and Germany called on their nationals to leave Ukraine, and the British government, whilst claiming that it stood shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine on the Twitter sphere, on the ground told its military training personnel to get out. That way, Ukraine could know what to expect. It was alone, and as for getting any assistance from its alleged friends, particularly those who were there to train its military, it could forget it all completely. That's it. You're going to have to stand up by yourself. On the same day, proposals were floated for a meeting between Putin and Biden, but the Kremlin said it was too early. Of course it was. First of all, they had to invade and conquer Ukraine. Putin, of course, could not back down. He deliberately escalated this situation. Any sign of weakness could threaten his position and, of course, his personal wealth and retirement plan. On 22nd of February 2022, Putin recognized the independence of the 2 separatist regions in eastern Ukraine and sent the Russian army in on a peacekeeping mission. The Security Council met in an emergency meeting, and most of the United Nations denounced the invasion. At this point, it's worth remembering that Russia signed the Budapest Memorandum in 1994, which guaranteed the borders of Ukraine, and that the terms of that agreement stated that any breach should be reported to the Security Council. So it was reported to the Security Council, and Ukraine was invaded anyway. In response, both the United States and the European Union stated that they would adopt sanctions against Russia. Moscow said Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, the same man who had lodged the Budapest Memorandum for Russia with the UN 27 years earlier, was still prepared to meet Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, for a scheduled meeting in Geneva 2 days later. However, Russia invaded Ukraine on the 24th of February. I hope you found that interesting. I have done this in somewhat of a hurry in regard to the current situation, and so this is the sort of thing that might be updated at a later date if it's required. Thanks for watching. I upload every Friday at 8 in the evening my time, Central European time, and all sorts of other times in other countries. Thank you.